It's Florida Daily TV, brought to you by FloridaDaily.com. For all your news on politics, business, and education, it's FloridaDaily.com. Now, here's your host, Ed Dean.
Welcome back to another edition of FloridaDaily.com, of Florida Daily TV. I'm your host, publisher Ed Dean. Kevin Derby is our editor. Also here in the studios with us, our legal commentator and legal news analyst for FloridaDaily.com, Ron Davis, attorney RonDavis.com. Kevin, good to have you back today. Let's start off with we got a big story we did last week. State Representative Anthony Sabatini. Whatever you may think of him, what you see is what you get. And he's been traveling around the state. He's been from Leon County down to Jacksonville, down to South Florida, going after a minute. And he's got big crowds. He's got a couple hundred that usually show up. We were covering one up in Jacksonville a couple weeks ago. And we had a big story last week about how he's suing many of these municipalities over the face mask. He comes out and says, listen, we encourage you to wear them, but we think that these are more of a proclamation. In other words, there isn't like a law in order, except for something that might get passed last minute, or a mayor may have a proclamation. He says this thing is unconstitutional. This got a lot of feedback last week from many of our readers.
Yeah, it absolutely did. Both advocates for it, opponents of Representative Sabatini's position. It has absolutely sparked the debate, though, here in Florida. And look, Sabatini certainly is one of the more conservative members of the Florida House. He leads with his chin quite a bit, but I think it has given him a lot of exposure. Yeah. If you're looking for Republican leaders, I think Representative Sabatini is going to be a factor in future elections. Whether you love him or you hate him, he has absolutely been able to get a lot of press for himself, far more so than the other 119 members of the Florida House. Yeah,
so evidently he was on CNN last week. We talked about this last week where, they said, well, he said things are fine, and Brandon Keller from CNN tried to call him out. But the CNN only reports the positive cases they admitted when it comes to COVID-19, and not about how some of the areas with hospitalization rates have not really gone up a whole lot in the death rate as well. So, Ron, you as the legal commentator here on also on radio shows, but also the legal analyst here for FloridaDaily.com, does the state rep have a lot to hold on? I mean, are a lot of these masks considered unconstitutional? Yes, no, where?
We don't know yet. We're in uncharted territory. I guess if you're talking about government action requiring to do certain things, it certainly opens up a whole broad spectrum of things that you can challenge. I think
Wait, what do you challenge?
Well, I think you're going to start seeing the challenges on some of the enforcement of it. If you get a fine, if you have something happens, we talked about it down in South Florida, right. It's a $500 fine. You're going to start seeing those challenges. The problem right now is the court system is so backlogged. Right. It's going to take months before we see those challenges. Challenges like he filed a couple weeks ago here in Duval. Again, that's going to go so slow.
So he was down in South Florida. We had one of our reporters covering down there. He was down in South Florida where, for those of you listening here, down in South Florida, Kevin, they're not the same everywhere in the state. For example, South Florida, which Ron alluded to, has a first time it's a verbal warning. Second time it's a $50 fine. Third is $150. The fourth is $500, plus you're going to go see a judge. You've got, and I want to get to the sheriffs here in a few moments, you've got many of the municipalities 60 days in jail, but they say that it's not enforceable. And I wonder, before I go back to Kevin, Ron, let me go with you. Is it because they say it's a proclamation? For example, if this had already been on the books, I don't know, in some municipalities, if the state rep would be able to win this, but he says a lot of these are just doing it at the last minute. It's like an executive order by the mayor. It's not nothing that's been passed. He says that's where a lot of lawsuits come into play.
Correct, and the enforcement is usually through the regulatory process.
Right.
When it's done by that venue, you're not going to have the sheriff's office step up and do this. You're going to have regulatory agencies, either Department of Licensing, whatever that branch may be in the local government. They're going to come around. They're going to enforce it that way. Now, there are certain, for instance, once you declare the state emergency, if you don't follow the directives, then that could lead to a second-degree misdemeanor. So it just kind of depends on how it was, under what avenue they are when they declare that executive order.
The next big thing is the enforcement of this. Where do you see that going?
I think you're going to see where you see a lot of things, even like in the Second Amendment. You're going to see sheriffs saying, I don't want to waste my time doing this.
He's got a good point, Kevin. We have an article out this week at FloridaDaily.com. You've got the president of the Florida Sheriff's Association, Bob Guattari, out there out of Pinellas County, says, hey, I'm not the mask police. I'm not going to go along with this. Sheriff Wayne Ivey, who we're big fans of down there, just because he gives us the time of the day, down in Brevard County. And he sits back and says, listen, this is personal responsibility. Yes, we encourage it, but I don't have time. You've got the the sheriff from Hillsborough County, I think it's Chronister, I may get the last name mixed up. You've got several other sheriffs going, hey, listen, we've got enough to deal with. This is a lot of undue burdens out there. Even we got Ron quoted in one of the articles by saying, listen, can you imagine 911 blowing up with phone calls of people not wearing masks?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, it's going to be one of those laws that's going to be on the books. We'll see if they enforce it. They might if they want revenue, if the counties are really running low, and some of them are. That's a possibility. But I don't see really the rank and file police officers and law enforcement personnel really going to bat for this.
But I will tell you this, Sheriff Bradshaw down in Palm Beach, I think it's Palm Beach County, says he's going to enforce it. He's got no problem with doing that. I think he's doing it because he's got to.
Look, those three giant counties in Southeast Florida, a little bit different politics than the rest of the 64 counties across the state.
So this is going to be interesting. Now, let's get to the next big issue. We got a story that I think we're going to come out here in the next few weeks. I think we're going to coincide it after some people are going on a little summer vacation. Ron, the Washington Post came out about 2 months ago, talked about the boatload of lawsuits. Now, we've got them here in Florida where we're going to sue Carnival Cruise Lines. I'm giving an example because of COVID-19. We've heard about school districts being sued because some kid couldn't have a graduation. Churches in the state of Florida are saying, hey, listen, this whole mandates of the freedom of assembly and the First Amendment and lawsuits out there. You've got businesses. You've covered this on radio as well throughout the state. You've got businesses by saying, you know what? It was almost like unglorified version of eminent domain. The local municipality told me I had to shut down, and then they're telling me I can borrow money. I don't want to borrow money. You unduly and unjustified shut me down. How many of these lawsuits do you think we're going to see over the next several weeks and months, maybe?
Oh, you're going to see thousands. The question is will you ever actually ultimately see them? How long will it take to work its way through the system?
Because you point out there's a backlog.
There's a horrible backlog right now, and getting to the civil side of cases, there hasn't been a criminal trial, criminal jury trial in Florida since March, and they have suspended the speedy trial right now until this pandemic is done or until the Supreme Court says it's back up. You're going to have probably 20-30% of the people incarcerated in jail waiting for trials probably going to start demanding speedy trials. You're going to see retired judges. You're going to see senior judges coming in off the retirement. You're going to have civil courtrooms taken over by the criminal judges just to get rid of that backlog. So it is absolutely, when it finally gets started, it's going to be crazy on how long it takes to get to trial on any particular issue. I think what you're going to see the constitutional challenges along like we talked about, the criminal cases that are generated as a result of doing something, not doing something, enforcement. You're going to see some of these restaurants suing and saying you had no business coming in and shutting us down. Those will move their way through the system a little bit faster than some of theirs, especially if there are fines or sanctions involved. Right. They'll begin to challenge those a lot quicker.
Kevin, I know that I know Marco Rubio, the senator from this state, also Rick Scott has weighed in. They say that they agree with that of I guess Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader in the state for the state of Florida, by saying they don't want to be sending money out to states when they want bailouts pre-COVID. And listen, I got to tell you, that may sell among the U.S. Senate. This type of stuff is not going to pass the U.S. House. There are congressmen, Democratic congresspeople in the state of Florida aren't going along with the liability protection because why? They get a lot of support from the trial lawyers in the state.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you'll see that across the country as well. Look, I think the Senate and the House are going to continue to be at loggerheads as they talk about yet another coronavirus stimulus package. This could be part of it on the Senate side. Certainly McConnell wants it to be. We'll see where it goes. Democrats may be thinking, hey, we have a chance to flip the Senate and maybe we stall. Republicans could also think, hey, we're not going to get any more House seats. Senate's in play in November. Maybe we take the best deal while we can, as long as we have the White House and the Senate under our control. There's a lot of moving parts here. And look, there isn't much time. We always say, well, it's 100 and some odd days to the election. No, it's not. The election begins September 18th, folks. That's when mail-in ballots start coming in.
Hey, by the way, I got to ask you a quick question. Yeah. The RNC convention's coming to Jacksonville. I have to assume that if you're one of these out there, I don't care what group you may be with, but you want to protest, it's going to be ground zero. Now they're talking about moving it outside, 90-degree weather. What are people saying behind it? Is this looking to be a disaster? Or are they going to, which I heard some lobbyists tell me a few weeks ago, that they may want to limit to the delegates, 1 day's worth of speech, and let's get out of town. What are you hearing?
Yeah, that's exactly what you're hearing. Is they're going to limit the crowds. They're going to limit some of the crowds to just delegates, just alternates. They might expand things with a rally. But look, no matter where you put it, whether you put it at the baseball grounds of Jacksonville, whether you put it at Everbank Field where the Jaguars play, there's going to be a lot of empty seats. It presents bad optics. The other thing I think we have to worry about, a lot of key Republicans at the national level are basically saying, I'm going to pass on this one. What's going to happen is you're going to see a lot of alternate third-string county leaders from across the states. This is their one chance to go to a Republican convention. You'll be looking at an older crowd. All of a sudden, people in their 60s and 70s dealing with 100-degree heat in Florida.
And by the way, Kevin, the optics are going to be bad because you're going to look at an auditorium that normally would be filled if Trump showed up. It won't be filled at all.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, we already saw how that can be a bad show for Trump in Tulsa. We saw the event in New Hampshire get canceled because of weather reasons. Now it's a bad look for the president, and he can't afford it.
Let's have a lot of fun. We talk about this all the time. Polls in the state of Florida. Fox News had a poll that came out. President Trump says Fox is the worst when it comes to polling. I just like listening to him talk about it. He's entertaining. He says that 2016, the polls got it wrong. Basically, when you look at the Fox News poll this past week that showed that he's down by 8, 49 to 41. Actually, those numbers are a little bit higher for Biden. The same numbers show that Hillary had the same amount. But I've got to agree with some of the other individuals out there, Ron. The numbers and the issues are much different. This was coming off of years of Obama, manufacturing loss. The president is trying to run back things that happened pre-COVID. Some people may give him a pass, but I look at certain polls, but I also look at the breakdowns of the polls. Trump has always done well in the economy. So how is it that some can sit back and say that the poll's fake? But if he's leading them on the economy, we believe that section of the poll.
Well, I don't think that they sit back and say it's fake and we believe that section. I think what they say is that section's actually higher than what it says. So if it says that he's leading 47% of the American public says they trust him on that issue, I think what people are really saying that's probably over 50. So what the right argues is that those polls are underrepresented by Republicans. So it's not that
the sampling.
The sampling. So they're not saying that that 47. If he's doing better than Biden in this, they're not. We're still saying that's
okay. Let me
negative.
stop right there, Kevin. That is a valid point that a lot of people would say. A lot of supporters of Trump, they would sit back and say, "Well, you look at the sampling, it's maybe 5 to 8 more points of Democrats versus Republicans." How do you answer that?
Well, there's more Democrats in this country than Republicans. Look, the one thing I think that Trump's people are not quite grasping in many ways. Republicans right now are not as on board with Trump as Democrats are with Biden. Now, I'm not saying Biden's getting that kind of enthusiasm. I think the Democrats are more willing to go to bat against Trump than Republicans are willing to save him. I think you're seeing a lot of suburban women turning against the president. That's part of it. I also think, to be very candid with you, it has been the mixed messaging from the White House over and over and over again. Their efforts, whether it was Chris Wallace's interview on Fox, whether it was the Hannity efforts, it just isn't working. They're asking simple questions, kind of like Roger Mudd asking Teddy Kennedy in 1980, why do you want a second term? Well, kind of, sort of. Hillary's awful. It's all about Russia. But the president is all over the place. He's got to get his messaging back.
Let me ask you.
That's what's occurring.
Let me ask you. So when people sit back and go, Kevin, hey, the pollsters got it wrong in 2016 compared to 2020. How do you give the analysis on that then?
I agree, but I think the problem is it's not just the polls. Look, money right now is flowing to Biden. Big business is putting its money behind Joe Biden, not Donald Trump. That's part of it. And let's also be very clear. Donald Trump fired his campaign manager last week. You don't do that when you're ahead. That's what we're looking at. I think there are more symbols than just the polls here showing Trump is in for a rough patch. One other thing, I've got to say this.
All right.
Reagan in 84, Clinton in 96, George W. Bush in 2004. You know what they didn't have? They didn't have everyone in their party already up and running for president 4 years later.
That's true.
Well, we have Mike Pompeo going to Iowa. We have Rick Scott running ads in Iowa. We have Chris Christie and Larry Hogan talking about 2024. The Republicans are getting off the Trump ship and are already looking ahead to 2024. That's not a reassuring sign for the White House.
I had on my radio show, we had Pinellas County Sheriff, who's also the president of the Sheriff's Association, Bob Katari. And I asked him, I said, is the defunding the police, is this the flavor of the month? And, it was kind of like, well, it's a pretty long month going on. If this is still an issue into October, November, I think numbers do bode well for President Trump. You see gun sales again in the state of Florida spiking to record increases. A lot of them are first-time individuals, women buying guns all over the map here. The question that I also want to ask is that you got these unity gathering between, we call them Biden out there because, everybody claims that once this is done, that the pandemics will go away. They say that in jest. We're having a little fun here. That there will be no more protests. COVID will go away. That's what you hear. It's always entertaining to hear it. But you got this unity gathering between the Bernie Sanders crowd, all right, which maybe in the caucuses, but when it came to the regular primary vote, did not pull it out. Biden really whipped him pretty good. If they try to move a Biden a little bit more to the left, that might be some saving grace for the Trump crowd, maybe even in the state of Florida.
No, I agree. This is kind of interesting because you usually see your candidates moving toward the center.
Yeah, he's moving left.
We know who Trump is. Trump is, and he stayed pretty consistent where he's at. So he didn't run to the right and then try to move back during a primary because he was unchallenged, essentially. Biden, I think that the BLM movement has overstepped itself. It is now moving to the point of absurdity. The things that they're requesting, the things they're demanding, name changes. Now we're moving further and further and further, down the rank of lesser known people, and well, this person should go. So I think Middle America is looking at a lot of that and lost its taste. We talked about this I think a couple weeks ago. If all of this movement had started now or maybe a month from now and it was closer to the election, I would see it as actually a problem for Trump. But I think the way it's moving and the way the left is acting, you're seeing, over 50 nights of protest in Portland at this point.
But that doesn't translate to Florida.
I think most of America is still looking at that and they're disgusted. It's just they're quiet. What's the point of talking? Because as soon as you talk, you've got the left and the media jumping down your throat.
Kevin, let me ask you this. There was a poll that came out that said around 85 to 88% of what was called the Bernie bros, the Bernie Sanders crowd, are probably, just because of the dislike for Trump, are probably get on board with Biden. Do you buy into those numbers? Those numbers are pretty consistent?
Yeah, I think Democrats are absolutely united. They're not united behind Biden. They're united against Trump.
Right.
And because of it, I think Biden is in a far better shape to get Democrats than Hillary Clinton was 4 years ago. Look, one thing that we got to talk about, we always seem to think that everyone who backed Trump was 100% behind him. Folks, there were a lot of people who hated both Trump and Hillary and saw Trump as the lesser of two evils. Well, 4 years later, they look at Biden and they're looking at Trump, and this time they're making the exact opposite calculation. They think they both stink, but they're willing to vote for Biden because, hey, 140,000 dead, and we're just waving the Bible screaming law and order on Twitter. It's not working. I think Biden is taking advantage of Trump blowing up. Trump's having messaging problem across the board. I mean, why is Peter Navarro? Why is Larry Kudlow?
Yeah.
Guys who are economic specialists. Why are they out front?
And by the way, I'm not convinced that a debate between Biden and Trump's going to pull it off for Trump. I don't even think Biden's even going to debate.
No, Trump's not the best debater in the world, and you've got just one target. Fortunately, Biden is who he is, but he's actually more articulate than what you see in some of the characters.
I mean, his gaffes are hysterical. But
I disagree with Kevin just a little bit on people who held their nose and voted for Trump the first time and now saying, well, I'm going to go for Biden. I've talked to several women recently that don't like Trump. Personally, don't like him.
Right.
Didn't feel good about voting for him the last time. But they're very solid. There is no question in their mind that they're voting for him now.
Listen, we got to get running on for today, but here's the question. COVID is number one, depending on some polls, healthcare, economy. If COVID's still number one, I think that now unless the White House press briefings, which are starting to come out again this week, if they change for Trump, that's one thing. Otherwise, if COVID's still there, it looks like a go Biden, Kevin.
Yeah, if COVID's the big issue in November, I think Trump's a one-termer. If the economy moves up, yeah, I think Trump is able to have a chance. But, right now, there's got to be a game change on COVID. And remember, early voting begins September 18th. That's what we're going to be looking at voting across the board. States like Minnesota and Michigan, Michigan in play. Minnesota, I don't see Minnesota in play, but Trump's people seem to think they have a chance there. Those being the case, those are early states, and the votes will be coming in quickly.
Kevin Derby is the editor for FloridaDaily.com, the best. And, of course, Ron Davis, of course, is our legal analyst for Florida Daily, our news legal analyst. And I'm your host, Ed Dean, the publisher. Also, don't forget, daily. We do our own stories, folks. We originate them at FloridaDaily.com. Again, that's Florida FloridaDaily.com. This has been another edition of Florida Daily TV. We'll see you next time. And don't forget, FloridaDaily.com.